what's your take on what Reng Zhengfei had to say just there?
No one's going to win in this tech Cold War. And so we run the risk of ending up having two internets, China and the rest of the world. And so a lot of what he's saying is true. They can still flourish without the U.S., but at the same time, so much of the U.S. tech industry is intertwined with the companies in China. So as much as this may seem like it's about U.S. tech supremacy, these policies from the U.S. perspective are really misguided. This is not like steel in terms of being able to shut out one supplier. Huawei is integrated with the rest of the world and with the entire rest of the tech industry, and that's why he says he doesn't want there to be any retaliation against Apple.
So some would argue that we already have two internets. China does not have Facebook, Google, many of the things that make at least the American internet so distinct. Aren't we already there?
Well, no, because right now we have Apple, we have an Android operating system. How are we going to feel when Huawei and other Chinese companies create their own mobile operating system, or when they're no longer buying American chipsets? I think that we're ending up in a world. We're going to end up in a world that none of us like, and it will really stymie the growth of American tech companies and leave the Chinese market wide open for those local competitors.
That said, do you worry about the security risks? Do you worry about the surveillance issues that the administration is so concerned about?
I worry about the security and their surveillance issues, but I don't think it's just concentrated in these companies. I think that any one of these companies can be hacked. Any one of the equipment, whether it's a Chinese company or an American company, they can all be used for other means beyond what they're intended for protection or for good surveillance. So I think that we're focused in on these companies because one way or the other they're controlled by the Chinese government, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be worried about others. Hikvision and Dahua, they control around a third of the global market to Chinese companies, but there are lots of other companies and their equipment can be compromised the same way.
Bloomberg has reported on a number of different companies that could be affected the most by these trade tensions, by an increasingly separate China, not just Apple, but also Marriott, Nike, Merck, Marvel Entertainment. Beyond two internets, what do you see if we keep going on this current path?
What's the problem with this path is that it's focused on technology, but it really shouldn't be around protection. It really should be around intellectual property. The biggest risk to most of the American companies, whether they're in oil and gas or they're in technology or any other business, is the protection of their intellectual property in China. And that's really where the focus should be. It really shouldn't be just on security, because the security risks are widespread. The intellectual property risks are real, and they're not being addressed.
So what are you most concerned about, especially given Huawei's leadership position in 5G?
I think what I'm concerned about is that none of these companies is an island, and it'll end up stymieing the growth of American companies that are supplying the chips, whether it's Qualcomm and others who are driving these changes. And so Huawei, he's right. Huawei could create their own chips. They have access to a lot of intellectual property. So I worry about the balkanization of the internet, where so much of the technology industry is about companies and countries coming together.
Now, let's say President Trump and President Xi do reach an agreement. Do you think at this point things can just go back to normal, or that after this sort of blow up, many of these companies would resort to Plan B anyway and start focusing on how they can make their own chips, how they can be more reliant on Chinese technology rather than American technology?
I think the Plan Bs are already there, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to follow them. what the impact on this in some ways could be greater on U.S. companies. Look at how really intertwined the supply chain of most of the American technology companies are with China, the percentage of the manufacturing that takes place in China. Some of that may move to other places like Vietnam, but it's really hard to break this up. Right now it can be undone. If we're talking about much farther down the road, it's going to be a lot harder.